So there's a lot I want to get into on this topic with you. But first, I've gotten to know you over the years and Ancora because you have largely played in the industrial part of the economy and taken activist stakes and stances in companies like CSX and Norfolk Southern and U.S. Steel and C.H. Robinson. Now you're setting your sights on media. Why?
Look, I think it's a type of situation. I mean, whether it is media, whether it's industrials, we typically get involved in situations where we think boards have made decisions that aren't necessarily in the best interest of shareholders, and we have an opportunity to get involved to maximize value. I mean, we're actually very excited to do that here, to play a role, and that's essentially the real answer to the question, is a role that we can play in helping shareholders maximize full and fair value for their shares. I mean, Morgan, if you give me a moment here before we get anything else, I think there's just a couple of key points we want to make about this merger. I mean, first, we think that the Netflix deal itself is actually inferior to the Paramount offer. It's, in addition to being conditional, the $27.75 is something that could be far less than that. The deal's predicated upon how much of the $17 billion of debt that ends up getting transferred over to Discovery Global actually ends up effectively being transferred. Anything that's pushed back to the Warner Brothers side is actually a reduction in the purchase price. So there are scenarios here where this could be a low 20s offer, and shareholders are being asked to vote on this without even knowing yet how much debt really, in the end of the day, ends up at Discovery Global. Lastly, the antitrust implications of this deal look severe. Last week, the company had obviously a really bad week in Washington, D.C. with policymakers and other antitrust officials making their pathway to approval here dubious at best. I think, secondly, the other key point we want to make is obviously the Paramount offer. We think is a better value, includes better certainty and regulatory clarity. The $30 enhanced offer that was put out yesterday, it's not only higher, but it includes improvements they made on the breakup fee. But ultimately, they've said many times it's not best and final. We think that number could even be better. And when you look at how that deal's backed by Larry Ellison, its trust is effectively investment grade. It's rock solid. The regulatory side, Paramount has a much easier pathway to approval and obviously a much better relationship with the current administration. And then lastly, this is really important. I think a lot of people may have not caught this or be unaware of it, but that proposal yesterday that came through from Paramount actually really is a change, because under the merger agreement, there's a clause that allows them, if there's a prospect here of reasonable certainty that this can lead to a superior offer, it effectively opens the door here for negotiation. This is something that's been criticized, that both sides aren't talking. The Warner Brothers side can't talk to the Paramount side. Well, now this is the board's opportunity. The door's open, as we said. Now it's the opportunity for the board to step through it and negotiate the best offer as possible for shareholders, maximizing value. Yeah. We think for Paramount, this is a huge deal. It's transformative. It's a once in a lifetime chance for them. We believe that number will go up, and ultimately, this is the board's chance to not fall down and do the right thing for shareholders.
There is so much you just said there for me to unpack. I'm going to work my way backward. But first, just to go back to this enhanced offer from Paramount yesterday, ticking fee, will cover the current termination fee, offer its own reverse termination fee, eliminating those financing costs associated with that spin that would have to happen. Everything, as you mentioned, except raising the actual per share offer price. It sounds like you anticipate that too could happen. At what point does the offer, though, begin to lose value for shareholders, a Paramount offer?
Well, I mean, look, lose value relative to
not
Netflix.
Maximize value.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I think that number increases. That's obviously our belief. The number is far better than what is being offered today as an alternative. It's a certain offer, which in all cash, it's not conditional. But like I said, I think, the board has a job to do, which obviously is to go out and get the best value they can. What happened yesterday, why I think that's so important, is now that opportunity to negotiate exists. And so there is an opportunity now for the board to step forward and begin the discussions here and get to the best outcome possible. But I mean, make no mistake, the current offer, even as currently configured, is better than what's on the table for shareholders today.
Yeah, $200 million stake. Are you growing that? B, at less than 1%, have you been able to engage? Have you reached out to the Warner Brothers Discovery team and David Zaslav? Have you spoken to them?
Look, the stake is a growing stake. It's one that we will likely continue to add to. It really depends on kind of what happens next and whether this ends up being something that involves maybe, whether it's a proxy fight or withhold campaign, whatever that might be. But I mean, we do view this as a situation where the board should be held accountable if they fall down here on this transaction. In terms of how we've reached out or not, I mean, look, I think a lot of that is stuff that's been behind the scenes in the last 24 hours from Mr. Zasloff and his PR firm saying, spreading false information. But ultimately, we have engaged and look, this doesn't need to turn into a fight. It really doesn't. But if it does, I mean, we have a long history of exiting CEOs have chosen to fight with Ancora, and that can happen again to Mr. Zasloff if that's how he wants to engage with us.
Yeah, and as somebody who's covered some of your proxy fights and other moves with companies, you've had a very successful tenure. So in light of that, it sounds like you would engage in a proxy fight if they don't engage on this offer.
Absolutely. We are currently interviewing director candidates. It's something that we're evaluating actively. I mean, really, if you said, why is Ancora here? Why are we public? That's what it's about. It's really about showing that there is an alternative here, that if ultimately the board fails to maximize value, that there is a process thereby which we can actually step in and track doing so. With stakes, by the way, similar size. I mean, we were on the proxy fight with Norfolk Southern with a stake that wasn't much larger than we have today here in Warner Brothers, and so I'm confident that we could obviously inflict a lot of damage on the Warner Brothers board if that's what we're forced to do. But I hope that's unnecessary. I hope they, like I said, we're actually excited about what happened yesterday and think that now the impetus is there, and obviously go do right for shareholders.
So in light of that, what does success look like? Is it truly pure play Paramount actually, winning the bid and being able to take over Warner Brothers Discovery, or is there a scenario in which a better offer from Netflix would be on the table for consideration?
That's possible. The latter that you just mentioned. I mean, certainly, I think this creates competitive tension, right? That's what you want in this situation. You want two parties that can actually compete and have an incentive and the mechanism to compete to put the best value forward. So whether it's Netflix or Paramount, my only concern with Netflix is obviously the regulatory pathway more than value. And so in their circumstance, I think their road to approval is much harder. It's probably harder in Europe than it is in the U.S. Quite honestly, their market share there is much higher. And so why I think this is actually an interesting transaction. But I think you do step back, though, when you ask the question you did, is that all the shareholders, whether it's Netflix or Paramount, they're being cashed out, right? There's no future for us as investors in Warner Brothers in a deal doesn't have a real stock component in it. So ultimately, this is the one opportunity, which is what M&A represents, for shareholders to maximize the value for their investment. And so that's the priority concern here, is what does that look like from the shareholder standpoint? But if you are asking longer term, what is success? I mean, look, I think the success outcome is much better for Paramount in that, look, it is a transformative transaction. This is a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them to basically acquire an asset as unique as Warner Brothers. It puts them on the map globally as a major player in the streaming market. I mean, effectively gives them almost the same subscription base as Disney and its related properties, and creates real competition, which is something that's good for consumers. It's good for the industry, whereas the opposite would be true, in my opinion, for Netflix.
Yeah, and finally, before we wrap this up, I just want to go back to what Warner Brothers has consistently said, as it has in the past rebuffed Paramount's offers. I mean, they've argued that the Netflix deal has greater value, more secure financing, and a cleaner path to regulatory approval. I know there's been some reporting on, regulatory scrutiny, but the company has also come out and said, hey, this is just, this is part of the process. You're saying no, that it's not part of the process, and that the smoother regulatory path is paramount. Just to dig a little more deeply into that, why do you think that's the case?
I think it's, I mean, honestly, look, we've been involved in situations that had, crazy regulatory paths, right? U.S. Steel last year. It's Proxy fight we got involved with. That was a deal that looked like it was terminal. You already had CFIUS effectively terminate the transaction and then kind of pass it forward to the Trump administration. But this pathway that we're seeing today, last week's Senate hearing that we had in Washington, D.C., there wasn't a single senator on either side of the aisle that was supportive of Netflix. And so they're going to face significant pressure. Obviously, this is a very unique situation in that you have the administration with some very vocal views, as they did in U.S. Steel as well. But, look, we've seen crazy deals that look, destined to fail. And that's why when you ask the question about Netflix offering more value, could it have a pathway to success? Maybe. I mean, because anything could happen in these situations. But when you look at it on the surface, Paramount's market share in the various categories it competes in versus Netflix, just kind of apples to apples, it really isn't close in terms of which one has the more difficult regulatory burden.